Must say it's a great privilege to be here this morning too, and really pleased to see many people that I know, because I know that you've been involved in the work in the radio. And what I'd like to do is pick up a biblical analogy from Matthew 14:22 to 34. You can read it all at home. It's a story of Jesus sending the disciples into the boat, going up the mountain, praying for the disciples, sending them into a storm. When they're in the storm, Jesus comes and he invites Peter to walk on the water. And I identify with Peter, because Peter gets out and he begins to walk, he begins to sink, but he walks, and eventually they reach the other side. I think that's an analogy of the radio ministry in Peru. Jeannie and I were 8 years in Peru. The first 4 years we were really dedicated to the seminary and setting that up in Tacna. Ultimately my wife set up a Bible bookshop as well. But for the last 4 years I was involved in the radio ministry. In fact, at the beginning I went with our mission lawyer in the year 2004 to Quito, Ecuador. I'll do this very briefly. The Lord put us on the boat of the radio. And on that ship, when the Lord puts you on a boat and sends you to the other side, He will take you to the other side. It seemed a long journey, to be quite honest. Very similar to the campsite in Ite, because you know all the things that have happened to Trevor in that journey. And we went to Quito to make links with HCJB, one of the oldest Christian radio stations in the world, now 80 years on the run, works in many, many parts of the world, and there in Quito employs 350 people and a huge clinic, and probably one of the best in the world. And we made a link, and that link has held, and today we broadcast. But as we set out on the journey, there were many storms, and I shared this storm just a week ago at another lovely fry for breakfast. Beets porridge, actually, that's what I normally have. And a week ago I mentioned the fact that in Peru, Alistair Creelman came out, had a storm in his life, got in a mission car. In fact, over the last few years, I don't know how many haven't been wrecked. That's the biggest killer of missionaries. Did you know that? Nothing to do with what I'm saying this morning, but pray for missionaries' safety on the road. More die of road accidents than anything else. And he had an accident. The car was more or less wrecked. Somehow they managed to get it to Ite, where Trevor was, and it's a long story. And Trevor eventually sold the vehicle. Now that was a storm for Alistair, and he could make no sense of it at that time, and that's what happens. And Trevor, when he sold the car, sold it to a man who said, "Oh, I know, incidentally, somebody who wants to sell a radio station." Now that's the radio station that we eventually bought. There were many, many more storms along the way. But the great thing is, and the biggest storm, incidentally, was the storm of getting total legality in Peru. That was a major thing. We would come home at the end of the year and I would say, 2005, year of the radio, great deputation talk. And then come back, 2006, year of the radio. And people said, and? The radio? Well, the great news was, the Lord took us to the other side in 2007. We got right over and we got total legality. And we broadcast from May 2007. People listen to the radio in Peru. I listen to classical radio. I have it on all the time in the car, but only when I'm in the car. And then television takes over and other kinds of things. But in Peru, people listen to the radio. And what we wanted when we got on the boat of the radio was to send out good biblical messages, evangelistic messages, teaching messages, and now the radio is linked up to 20 different Christian ministries in the world, including good ones like Luis Palau, Billy Graham, James Dobson, of course HCJB, and they download from the satellite, because the Lord has a great team there in Tacna, and I think one of the best. Do you know the amazing thing about the radio? If we hadn't been doing the radio, we would have probably come home a few years ago. And there were storms in Peru, but in the midst of the storm, the radio, for me personally, has always brought peace. And when Jesus comes in the middle of the storm, isn't that what He says? Don't be afraid, peace. And He invites us to come. And for me, there was peace, there was harmony, and we were tested. But that great belief that we had for the campsite, those who were involved, for the radio, that when the Lord puts you on a ship to go to the other side, He will take you to the other side. Now we're on the other side. And the radio station broadcasts 24 hours a day and has good programs, great teaching. People have been saved. I get in taxis in Tacna and people are listening to the radio. On the Tacna day the other year in the big park in Tacna, they were playing our radio, Radio Sembrador. And all Tacna were listening to a Christian radio on that day. And not only that, people are being edified. There are 2 radio stations in Tacna, and people said to me, why 2? Well, if you listen to the other one, I think most of us here would agree that what the Lord has done in our radio, and I can say this humbly before the Lord, giving Him the praise, is the best. And there's good teaching, we have good theology, people are being saved, edified, and non-saved people are also listening to the radio. It's been my privilege to be involved in the team in Peru, not necessarily working on the same projects, but the project of the radio. If anything gave me more joy in Peru, I can't at this moment think of it, because the radio was like the icing on the cake when it all came together in 2007. One stage I thought maybe I had been like Moses and struck the rock and got angry or something like that, and I wouldn't get into the promised land. But the Lord begins something, puts us on the boat, and on the other side, and I'm sure there are going to be more storms, but the Lord is blessing the radio ministry. I want to thank you as well. Trevor already said that, for those who have supported the ministry of the radio. And I can think of people here this morning, and I thank God for that. And I thank the Lord most of all, because I believe that the project, I'm going to say the one in Ite, the campsite, is a magnificent project. And also the radio were not just good ideas. I think they came from above. And when something comes from above, you can be absolutely sure the Lord's going to do it and see it through. At the beginning of the radio, I said, the whole project, I remember announcing it, and it was the thing that kept us going when the days were dark. I said that from Hebrews 11:1, that faith is radio. And that's true, isn't it? Because it's the evidence of things we don't see, and the invisible things that God brings to completion. So thank you, and the Lord bless.